Hello guys, it's Jumpstart here doing another Beyblade ranking. This time I'm going to rank every single Beyblade Burst system. So for context, I actually went through most of 2023 ranking every single Burst motif, and I actually planned to do a video like this shortly after that was done, probably in early 2024, and I just never did, so here we are doing it now. So as far as the kind of requirements for this list go, first up, this is my opinion. This is not meant to be like an objective thing, which system is the best. Also not competitive because, well, that'd just be kind of obvious, but just my opinion, how much I like each system. Also, as far as which systems I'm going off of 7 systems. We have the single and dual layer systems as separate systems, and after that, God, Chosets, GT, Sparking, and of course DB, which will include BU as well. Also, the subsystems will be counted as part of the main system. They won't really have a huge influence on the list itself, but they will be notable and I guess can at least help for, like, I don't know, a tiebreaker if needed. And this list is mostly about the overarching system, not the individual bays of the system. However, I will take into account the bays overall, like maybe the gimmicks, for example. If the gimmicks just feel lackluster, maybe the system just did not lend well to that kind of stuff, then I can, lower it, or, I guess if it went well, I could raise it, depending on how it went, but still, it is more about the overarching system over anything else. So, anyways, let's go ahead and get into the actual main list. So starting off at number 7, my least favorite system is the Choset system. I don't really like this system very much. I feel like in a lot of ways it's like a B-side to Beyblade Burst God. There's just not much here that I find interesting. First up, the layers. While they do have gimmicks, a lot of them I feel like are just very similar to previous gimmicks, which is definitely a problem that is apparent through a lot of late Burst. But yeah, a lot of the gimmicks are just kind of copy-paste, especially if it's, from an older motif that's in this line as well, which kind of makes sense, but, other gimmicks, I feel like, are just worse versions. Some are better, but still, it just depends. There are a few gimmicks I think went really well and are very interesting. I guess, like, something like Revive Phoenix would be a good example of that, but overall, not an overly interesting line. As far as the layers go. As far as the other parts go, drivers are just kind of drivers. I don't think there's a huge difference here. Discs. Problem. These are core discs, and most of them do not have frames. A lot of the bases that do have frames are special releases, or have the frame, in a different release. Geist Fafner being a great example. The starter did not come with a frame. You have to buy this special launcher set to get up the frame for whatever reason, so yeah, not my favorite thing right there. Beyond that, the subsystem of Chosets is the Chosets Awakening system. This is a weird system. So the main thing is that these parts here, the red parts on Chosi Valkyrie in particular, they pop out. This is the case for the other Chosi Awakening bays. Basically, these parts pop out, and you get a burst stopper. Basically, yeah, it's just no level chip hole, which I guess I didn't mention. Yeah, these can house level chips, which exist, but anyway. They don't have the level chip hole, and also, yeah, they have a burst stopper if you launch hard enough, which is an okay gimmick, I guess, although I think it was maybe a little bit too early for something like this, but anyways, Chosets just feels, in my opinion, like I said, kind of like a worse Beyblade Burst God, but the one big thing is that it has metal, which is just a power creep issue, I feel. Power creep wasn't new to Burst. I think we had pretty bad power creep throughout Beyblade Burst God, as much as I like that line. But when you add metal to every single layer, yeah, it becomes a bit of a problem for sure, and overall, the metal, I don't really care about it that much. It exists. It's, I guess, something that, is part of Burst now, so cool. I mean, sure, but yeah, power creep-wise, not exactly great, but, beyond the metal, again, I just feel like it was worse than Beyblade Burst God, its predecessor, so not really a whole lot that I, particularly care about here. Moving on to number 6, we have the Sparking system. Sparking is really weird. On one hand, I think that these are some of the best looking bays on Burst, and actually like Sparking quite a bit. On the other hand, the system is just so painfully awkward. So I'll take these apart to really show what I'm talking about, but basically, you got the, the chassis, which this is a double chassis. There are double chassis and single chassis, which I'll get to, but first up, you have to, like, snap this off, which I don't like how that connects and, like, snaps. It just feels awkward to me, but Anyway, the ring and chip, these attach like pretty okay. Like it's not too much of a problem. Then you get to core chips. Now, usually parts like these aren't meant to be like removed all the time, so it doesn't need to be that easy to take out. We have some, stuff like God chips that also, aren't the easiest. You need a tool for those, but for these, why? You have to push them out, which these are also very prone to breakage. And then after it's pushed out, it doesn't just come out. You have to like awkwardly, like, try and get it out of the slot. It just, I really, really don't like how this works. It's always awkward. It's never just easy to deal with. So yeah, I don't like how chip cores work at all. Beyond that though, I also just don't like how chassis work. So yeah, that is why sparking is so low. I just feel like the system itself is very, very awkward. I do like some parts of the system, like double chassis definitely give you some interesting stuff, and I guess changing how discs work to be, chassis isn't a bad idea. I mean, you get stuff like, Variant Lucifer, which have insane gimmicks. I feel like we didn't get the full potential of double chassis. Unfortunately, I think that you could have done a lot more with them. They didn't, but regardless, potential was there. My biggest problem with the sparking system actually comes from the single chassis bays. So, aside from Glide Ragnarok right here, they always had reuse discs. This one has its own disc wheel, but my problem is that getting single chassis off is so annoying. You usually have to grab like a disc to like pry this off, and even then, yeah, it's not really an enjoyable experience, as you can tell. The fact that, because like core chips are one thing, right? Or chip cores, those are one thing. But single chassis, you imagine you want to like take these off of these, but you have to take them off to like customize rings and chips and whatnot. So like, it's so bad. 4 attack is like the only one that you can kind of get off without too much trouble, I feel. But beyond that, yeah, these just are pretty rough, I think. So I'm not a big fan on how these work at all. We also have a subsystem, the limit break system. So limit break system is much different. You effectively have a ring combined with a single chassis to be kind of like the GT bases in a way. That makes up the limit break rings. And you also have your own special 10 of discs, the limit break discs. The whole idea behind these is that after X amount of clicks, the ring will actually change. And, for example, Hyperion Burn here, after 1 click, these parts come out. The problem with the limit break system is that we already had stuff like this. Look at Bika Culkin. Had like the same idea where, parts kind of come out after, X amount of clicks, except with that one, it actually worked. These, I can push into easily. The other gimmicks aren't much better. Helios Volcano has like a mode change going from, 5-bladed to 10-blade. Also has like the, 1.5 times like turn. Except that doesn't do a whole lot. And the mode change, I feel like the bay is just too smooth for it to really do a whole lot anyway. Lucifer at the end, the ring kind of drops down a bit, at least the outer part does, and then you have the free spin. That does something, but I would rather have just had a free spin ring from the start instead of this. I don't really get it. Limit break as a concept is something we technically already had 3 years prior, and I don't really feel like it had that big of an impact, and it also just really takes a lot out of, what the sparking system was, because, well, here's the limit break ring. It's quite large, as you can probably tell. As far as layer customization goes, you only get the chip and chip core, no chassis, and you also need special discs, as you need these little tabs here to determine how many clicks it takes for the limit break to activate. So your only customization is basically chip plus chip core and driver. Everything else has to be tied to the limit break itself, which I don't like at all. I feel like this just didn't work well. There are other systems that actually kind of do restrict parts, but I feel like those at least actually do stuff. And like Joseph's isn't bad, even though I'm not big on the Awakening system, because with that one it's just layer. You just block out the level chip slot. But that's fair, I would say. And the other ones I think are just generally more impactful if they are, restrictive, whereas I just really don't think the limit break system needed to be like this at all. So yeah, sparking, it's awkward. I just don't really like sparking all that much, if I'm being honest. Number 5, we have the GT system. So GT, This system is very weird. So first up, drivers are like the same. But discs, they're finally different. After 2 years of core discs, we now have these new style discs that have plastic on the outside, which is pretty neat. Some have gimmicks or different ideas. This one kind of is meant to just pair it with the Zwei base, so that works. But anyway, it was just cool to see a new style of disc, I think. But then we get to the actual, GT layer system. So this system, basically, yeah, you just kind of have these parts come out and anyway, so bases are meant to be kind of the main contact points. Also has gimmicks on these bases, and this one in particular, you just got like extra metal, which is cool. Then we have weights, which add kind of the extra weight of the layer that was introduced from Josets, just as its own modular piece. Also, can impact weight distribution, so that's kind of cool. And also the chip, giving kind of the the characterization of the bay, also the teeth, so that's nice. But one thing I don't like is just how they like stack on top of each other. I think the bases have to be a little bit too big for how the system works. A little bit too clunky. The sparking system does better with that, but just the customization aspect of it and how awful it is to take it apart and assemble it, I feel like makes it worse. But anyway, that said, these layers, I feel like, are kind of clunky, but again, they just feel better, I think, than sparking does, so I'm putting it a spot above. It's pretty close, though. But regardless, yeah. GT, I think, is a bit better just because of that. Also, I'm going to be honest, I think that the subsystems of GT are actually just better. So there's the Infinite Lock system and a Power Core system, which one bay actually features both, that being Regalia Genesis. So this has the Power Core system, which is a discharge fusion, which is crazy. Also, while Generate is just its own thing, kind of like a mode change thing, Hybrid here, as well as an Ignition Dash, are motorized, which makes these very crazy. Also, the layer is the Infinite layer, the Infinite Lock system, and basically, when you put this thing together, it does this thing, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, but where it kind of can just do this. It doesn't burst unless you're hitting one of the tabs, in which case then, yeah, it can burst, but it's really cool. I kind of wish this was like a last system type of thing, but yeah, whatever. It's still really cool. I think as like an anti-burst feature, the idea is definitely there. I like what they were going for here, and overall I think this definitely does help to kind of break up which one I think is better, that being GT over Sparking. Definitely a weird system for sure, but I mean, I like it well enough, I would say. Number 4, the dual layer system. Dual layers are pretty basic. I mean, you got discs and drivers that are like kind of similar to what we saw in the single layer system, except, I guess generally a little bit more interesting. Layers also kind of are now breaking out from what they once were, which is pretty cool. I mean, these parts are actual contact parts, not just underneath the transparent plastic, so, the colored plastic has more to do with the, contact points. Pretty cool. I do feel like by late dual layer, I wanted a bit of a refresh, which I think, Beyblade Burst God did very well, but I think for what the dual layers were, they were really good. There are also some odd ones here, like, Xeno Excalibur. I mean, this whole layer is just weird in general, but there are a few like this where, you had, like, these discs that had plastic on them on the outside, which is pretty interesting, but, yeah. I just think dual layers overall, they're, like, just a really, really solid system. They advance single layers enough. I like them. I do prefer single layers a little bit, but, again, I think a lot of that just has to do with kind of the fact that I don't care for some of the late dual layers. I don't know if that's just me just not liking those in particular, or if it just kind of felt like we needed something new, which I kind of think we did, honestly, so glad we got Beyblade Burst God when we did, but overall I still think that the, dual layer bays are really, really good. Number 3, the single layer bays. I'm sure this wasn't too much of a surprise to see these, just barely above dual layers, but anyway. These layers were interesting. They had this transparent layer of plastic underneath all of the color plastic, making up all the contact points. Some of the, single layers, especially the later ones, might have had small parts like this, for example, that poked out a little bit, but generally the transparent part just covered the whole thing. I really just like the way that these look. That's what gave these the edge, ultimately. I think that also Burst was a new concept, so I think that the system was a little bit more interesting overall at the time, so I personally preferred it a little bit, but yeah. Disc and drivers are about as basic as they can get, although I feel like we had some interesting stuff within this initial line compared to something like, Beyblade X, which I think stayed pretty bland. So with that said, I do like what we got here. I guess the one big exception to what I was just saying about single layers would be, Excalibur. I mean, this thing doesn't have transparent plastic. It has, translucent red plastic on top, and also the underneath color plastic of gold actually has like a pretty considerable part of, making up the contact points, which is interesting. Kind of just like a pre-dual layer right there. Also, interesting stuff. Again, we got a rubber fly here, which is pretty notable for being just a couple months into, Burst. So anyway, I think overall the single layer system just works. It's a really, really good starting system. My favorite starting system ever. I think that this just worked really well and was developed upon very nicely. So I definitely like this system and respect what it did. Number 2, Beyblade Burst God. So the God system is weird. So this really leveled up from the single and dual layer bays. That said, power creep might have been a bit of an issue, but I think every line had some issues with that, so I'm not going to really, dwell on that. But anyway, these layers now featured gimmicks, and you can see, like, Deep Cast had this whole idea of, like, this outer part being kind of vertically spring-loaded. You had core discs and now frames for the first time. Drivers being drivers generally a little more interesting than they previously were as well, but yeah. Every bay in this line had an ability called a God ability. That was great. I feel like Burst actually struggled to make new gimmicks a lot of the time, but this line, it was new, and they went really weird on some of them, which I liked. I wish we kind of saw some more weird gimmicks later on, which we did get some, but I just don't think there were quite enough of them. This line I just think did really well. The only downside I can think of is some of the really big releases, for whatever reason, they just didn't come with frames. Or it's friggin' here, the first LR bay. No frame. Why? Anyway. But overall, I just think that, God was really, really good. Again, when you have every bay having an ability, and when abilities are just like a brand new concept, gimmicks. We only had 2 at this point, with Zillion Zeus having the 2 metal balls, and I guess Lost Longinus with its metal, but yeah, they did a great job here. This felt like a really good advancement of Beyblade Burst. I just like what they did here. I don't have anything to complain about. I just think it gets outdone by a later line. That's really all there is to, complain about here, which isn't even a complaint, because for its time, I think Beyblade Burst God was absolutely insane. Number 1, DB. Yeah, DB is my favorite. So, the DB system, where do I even start with this? I guess I'll just say drivers are there. The drivers just stayed pretty consistent throughout all of Burst, but anyway. Taking this apart, really got to talk about the system as a whole here. So we have a new layer system with cores, which, are the characterization of the bay, and also, have the teeth of the bay. We also have armors, giving the layers weight, as well as, potential weight distribution stuff. And of course blades, giving the contact points, as well as potential gimmicks. This one just has some, rubber and whatnot on it, but yeah. If you notice, this is like the GT system. It's actually exactly like the GT system, except I think formatted much better. They kind of took what they learned from Sparking and applied it to GT, which I think, or not, well yeah, I guess to GT to make DB, which I think works very well. Also, you do have an extra gimmick with the high and low mode. You can orient these differently. Put the, blade on top of the core, if I can line that up. And then, armors go on top of there and whatnot to make, high mode. Or you can do what I always do, and I think most people do, which is you put the core on top of the blade. And then the armor goes underneath, and this makes up low mode. And this is really cool. I think also, the system just works well overall, but anyway. So this has to do with the discs. So high mode can work with any disc in Beyblade Burst, but low mode only works with the DB discs. I think this is a great way to advance the line in a new way, also changing how discs work, which also makes all these bays need new discs, so they can't keep relying on, like, core discs and sparking like they did sometimes for whatever reason. Anyway. But yeah, this gives a new way for these bays to kind of come together, which I think is really cool. Of course, you know, high mode is kind of the compatibility mode, also just like an alternate thing for DB bays to do, but low mode is really like the main new way. Like, you can just see that looks really cool, I think, but yeah. Low mode is like the new thing, I would say, but anyway. Yeah, it's a really cool line. Now, the subsystem is weird because there's technically the overdrive system, but it's like nothing. It's like a word, like just two words that describe bays, but they don't make sense. So there's like the, you know, whole thing with Grace Raphael, it's like a fuse layer. Of course, the mode change, like these parts come up. That's overdrive, I guess, and also for like Dangerous Belial having a burst stopper, like the Chose the Awakening system did. That's overdrive. Overdrive just feels like a random term that they threw on. I don't know why, but anyway. Speaking of Dangerous Belial, though, yeah, gears were a thing. These are, yeah, V gear, S gear, F gear, L gear, yeah, I don't know what to say about this. This is just such an insane bay. Like, gears were insane. I know it was like a specific thing as like a gimmick for like the Belial line, but I feel like gears were just so omnipresent that I have to at least talk about them a little bit. They were a really cool idea. I know you had to buy multiple products, which kind of sucked, but still, when you get like this crazy bay out of it, it kind of works. Now we also have BU. So BU is basically the second half of DB. For the most part, the bays are kind of the same, but there are a couple bays that are a little bit different, which I feel like is almost like the true subsystem of DB. So these are the BU lock bays. Now, BU locks were on almost every core that released during BU, but BU lock discs were only on a couple bays, Wind Knight here being one of them. So with these, you take them apart, and you can actually see on the core here underneath, there's these like extra like rivets here, which basically almost act like a second set of teeth. And again, these were on most BU bays, but what weren't were these BU lock discs. They have plastic on the outside, which is just cool, but then you have these little metal tabs on here, these little two, you know, like lines, which basically interact with those teeth, and yeah, it's like a second set of teeth, basically. It's really cool. Definitely a fan of how that works. It's just cool. I think it works. Like, a second set of teeth is like a very, I don't know, it just reminds me of like early Burst, like a gimmick you might have seen back then, but now, which I don't know, just something about it just seems so cool. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah. I wish they did more with this, honestly, throughout BU, but still, the fact that we at least got a couple is nice, and also, it doesn't completely interrupt these bays, because a lot of the cores are compatible with these discs, and while there are only a couple discs, you don't have to use them. You could use a BU lock disc with a regular DB core, or vice versa. It doesn't really restrict things, because it's not like a crazy gimmick or anything, so it shouldn't restrict anything, and it doesn't. It's just if you want to use a BU lock core with, you know, a BU lock disc, you can, and that's great. Also, gimmicks in this line were really cool. Like, you have the, you know, the Knight core, which has this weird vertical bound for like the entire layer. And of course, like, Wind has its different modes and stuff. There's just a lot of weird stuff in DB, honestly. I like this line a lot. It's easily my favorite line of Beyblade Burst. I just feel like this gets really crazy and cool and interesting. So yeah. Anyway, that's all I have to say for, you know, this video. I kind of want to do more Beyblade Burst videos because I've been not liking Beyblade X very much. I just don't care that much about it. I'll still do videos on it, but it's just boring, honestly. So I want to do some more Burst stuff. I don't know how much I'll do it, but maybe at least every so often. Every month or two, maybe. We'll see. Hopefully I get some ideas for it, but I don't know. I still want to talk about Beyblade. I just don't want to talk about Beyblade X constantly because I just don't, again, find it that interesting. So anyways, that's all for this video, so thanks for watching, and bye-bye.